The snow wasn't falling that night. It was attacking. Heavy, relentless sheets of white swallowed the road, erasing tire tracks almost as fast as they appeared. Ethan Miller leaned forward over the steering wheel, his jaw tight, eyes straining to see through the hypnotic blur. The heater in his old sedan rattled with more noise than warmth, and the clock on the dashboard blinked. 11:47 p.m. Christmas Eve. He should have been home hours ago. His son, Leo, would be asleep by now. The small, artificial tree in their apartment glowing quietly. A single wrapped gift waiting underneath it. Ethan had promised he wouldn't be late tonight. Another broken promise. Then, a flicker of movement on the roadside. Two figures, tall, but clearly struggling against the wind and snow. Ethan slowed down instinctively, his heart starting to pound a nervous rhythm against his ribs. As he got closer, he saw two young women standing near the guardrail, their coats dusted white. One was holding her phone up to the sky, as if pleading with it to find a signal. The other was pacing in tight, frantic circles, trying to generate some warmth. They weren't kids, but they were alone, and it was getting colder by the minute. Ethan hesitated. Every warning he'd ever learned, every lesson from his past, screamed at him to keep driving. Don't get involved. He had too much to lose. A pending court date hovered over his future like a guillotine. A criminal record that didn't forgive mistakes. And a son who depended on him staying invisible, staying out of trouble. But then he saw one of the women stagger, her knees buckling for a split second before she caught herself. That was it. That decided it. He pulled the car over onto the shoulder, the tires crunching in the deep snow. The cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped out. The taller of the two women turned sharply, her eyes wide and defensive. Her fear softened when she saw his hands were empty, his palms open in a gesture of peace. "Are you two okay?" Ethan called out, his voice nearly stolen by the wind. The woman nodded, a little too quickly. Yeah. Our car just died." Her sister let out a weak, breathy laugh that turned to vapor in the frigid air. Completely. The battery, the phone, everything went at once. Ethan glanced down the empty snow-covered road. There was nothing but darkness and the swelling storm. "How long have you been out here?" The sisters exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. "Longer than we planned," the second one admitted. "We thought help would come faster." Ethan didn't waste another word. He opened the passenger door of his sedan. "Get in, get warm." They hesitated for only a second before scrambling inside, bringing a gust of icy air with them. The old heater blasted away, and a thick, awkward silence filled the car, broken only by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers. "I'm Ethan," he said, breaking the quiet. "You too." "I'm Ava," said the one who'd been trying her phone. "And I'm Ellie," her sister added from the back seat. "We're twins." Ethan nodded, glancing at them in the rearview mirror. "I figured." They offered faint, tired smiles. As he carefully drove toward the distant lights of town, their story came out in pieces. They were 20 years old, college students home for the holidays. They'd been driving their father's car when it broke down miles back. He'd been with them, but had gone to find help on foot, telling them to stay put. That was hours ago. As the hours passed, the cold had worsened, and then, their only connection to the world, their phone, had died. "He's going to be furious," Ava said, staring out at the white landscape. "He hates when plans go wrong." Ethan kept his eyes on the treacherous road. "What does your dad do?" he asked casually. Ellie shrugged from the back. "He's a judge." Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. A judge. Of all the people, he felt a cold knot form in his stomach, a feeling worse than the winter chill. He didn't respond, just focused on driving. By the time they reached town, the blue and red lights of the police station cut through the blizzard like a beacon. Ethan parked and walked them inside, keeping a respectful distance, suddenly feeling like he shouldn't be there at all. The officer at the front desk listened to their story. "Judge Hale's daughters?" he asked, his tone shifting immediately. The sisters nodded. In an instant, the atmosphere of the quiet station changed. Phones started ringing. Officers moved with a new urgency. Someone brought the women blankets and hot coffee. They were safe. Ethan stood awkwardly by the wall, suddenly very aware of how out of place he looked in his worn-out jacket and work boots. An officer approached him, his voice quiet and professional. "Sir, I just need to get your name for the report." "Ethan Miller." The officer typed the name into his computer. He paused, then he looked up, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Miller, you have a hearing scheduled for next month, correct?" Ethan's throat went dry. He could only manage a quiet "yes." The officer just nodded slowly, saying nothing more. But the message was clear. A short while later, Judge Hawley burst through the doors. He didn't look powerful or intimidating. He just looked like a terrified father. His eyes found his daughters instantly, and the relief that washed over his face was raw and overwhelming. He pulled them into a tight embrace, gripping their coats as if he was afraid they'd vanish. "I told you not to move," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I told you." Ava just shook her head. "Dad, it was freezing." He closed his eyes for a moment, composing himself. Tene Tudned, and his gaze landed on Ethan. "You," Judge Halley said, his voice now steady, sharp. "You're the one who brought them in." "Yes, sir," Ethan replied. The judge studied him for a long, heavy moment. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It was a look of calculation, of assessment. "Thank you," he said finally. But the words were heavy, loaded with unspoken meaning. Days later, Ethan sat in a courtroom that smelled of old paper and furniture polish. His hands were folded tightly in his lap, his knuckles white. He didn't dare look back into the gallery. He already knew who would be sitting at the judge's bench. Judge Hawley entered, and the room rose. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs, so loud he could barely hear the gavel strike the wood. The legal proceedings began. Facts, arguments, technicalities. Ethan felt like he was watching his life from a distance. Then, Judge Halley spoke, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Mr. Miller," he said evenly, "I've reviewed your case file thoroughly." Ethan forced himself to lift his eyes and meet the judge's gaze. "Before I proceed," the judge continued, "I need to ask you a question." The entire courtroom seemed to shrink, all the air sucked out of it. "That night, Christmas Eve," Judge Halley said, his voice low but clear, "if you hadn't known who my daughters were, if you had no idea who I was, would you still have stopped?" The question hung in the air. Ethan didn't hesitate. He looked directly at the man who held his future in his hands. "Yes," he said, his own voice surprisingly firm, "because they needed help." Judge Halley leaned back in his tall chair. Behind Aizen, he could feel the presence of the judge's daughters, sitting quietly in the gallery. Snow had started to drift past the tall courtroom windows again, soft and gentle this time. The gavel hovered in Judge Hale's hand, and the choice that would decide Ethan's future freedom or ruin hung silently in the air, waiting. The courtroom was so quiet, Ethan could hear the old ceiling fan clicking above them. Judge Hale's fingers rested on the gavel, but he didn't strike it yet. Instead, he looked down at the papers once more, then back at Ethan. He wasn't looking at him like a judge. He was looking at him as a man who had almost lost everything that mattered. "When I left my daughters that night," Judge Halley said slowly, his voice echoing in the silent room, "I told them to stay in the car. I thought I'd be gone 10 minutes. He paused, and the weight of that pause filled every corner of the courtroom. It was nearly 3 hours before I found help. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The court clerk's fingers froze above her keyboard. Everyone was listening. I replayed that night in my head, the judge continued, his gaze distant for a moment. Every mile, every decision, every single moment I wasn't there. His eyes flicked briefly toward the gallery, where 2 young women, Ava and Ellie, sat perfectly straight, their hands folded in their laps. They listened carefully, not interrupting, not pleading, just being present. "I don't believe in coincidences," Judge Halley said, his focus returning to Ethan. "I believe in choices." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping a little but gaining intensity. "Mr. Miller, you had every reason to keep driving. A record, a child at home, a life already hanging by a thread." Ethan swallowed hard, the sound loud in the stillness. His heart was pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. "But you stopped," the judge said, his voice softening just a fraction. "And because you stopped, my daughters are alive." The gavel in his hand lowered Hoost a little, not with a bang, but with a quiet, deliberate motion. "I will not pretend the law doesn't matter," Judge Halley said, his tone firm again. "It does. Rules exist for a reason." Ethan's shoulders tightened, bracing for the inevitable blow. This was Italiano. The hope that had flickered inside him was about to be extinguished. "But justice without humanity," the judge added, his voice resonating with a deep conviction, "is not justice at all." The courtroom held its breath. It felt like the entire world had paused, waiting. "Mr. Miller," Judge Halley said clearly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Given the circumstances, you've demonstrated responsibility since the incident, and the character you showed that night." The gavel struck the block. The sound was sharp, final. "This court dismisses the charges." Ethan didn't react at first. The words hung in the air, seeming to float just out of his reach. Dismissed. He processed them slowly, trying to understand. It took a long moment for the meaning to sink in, to pierce through the fear and anxiety that had been his constant companions for months. When it finally did, his breath broke, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. His hands trembled as he lowered his head, overwhelmed. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. Meant for the judge, for fate, for whatever had brought him to this moment. Judge Halley simply nodded once. Professional. Final. As the room began to empty, the prosecutor packing his briefcase and spectators murmuring as they filed out, Ethan stood alone for a second. He was unsure what to do next. Freedom felt unfamiliar. Unfamiliar. Heavy. Almost. He had been so focused on the fight, he hadn't thought about what came after. Then, a soft voice broke the silence. "You didn't even know who we were," Ava said. She had approached him quietly, her sister Ellie right beside her. Ethan shook his head, looking at the two young women he had found stranded on that dark, snowy road. "Didn't matter," he said simply. Ellie stepped forward. "It mattered to us." Just then, Judge Halley joined them. He was no longer behind the bench, no longer elevated above them all. He was just a man, a father. "I owe you more than a verdict," he said, his expression serious. Ethan frowned, confused. "Sir, I didn't do it for..." "I know," Judge Halley interrupted gently. "That's why it matters." Together, the three of them walked out of the courtroom and into the cold afternoon air. A fresh layer of snow lined the courthouse steps, looking cleaner and calmer than the chaotic blizzard of that night. As they stopped at the bottom of the stairs, the judge turned to Ethan. "My daughters told me about your son," he said. "How you were worried about getting home to him." A faint smile touched Ethan's lips. "Yeah. He thinks Santa only visits if you're asleep. He was worried I'd mess it up for him." Judge Halley reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, crisp business card. "My number," he said, holding it out. "If you ever need anything. Advice. Help. A reference." Ethan hesitated for a second, looking at the card, then at the man offering it. He finally took it, his fingers closing around the thick paper. "Thank you." As the judge and his daughters started to walk away, Ava turned and called out, "Mr. Miller." He looked back. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice carrying on the chilly air. "That night changed us too." Ethan watched them go, watched them blend into the crowd until they disappeared. He stood there for a while, the cold air on his face, the business card in his hand, feeling the weight of the day finally begin to lift. That evening, Ethan unlocked his apartment door as quietly as he could. The lights were off, except for the soft, multicolored glow of the small Christmas tree in the corner. His son was asleep on the couch, one hand still clutching a crayon-scribbled note he'd written for Santa. Ethan knelt beside him, his heart full. He gently brushed the hair back from his son's forehead. "I'm home," he whispered. Later that night, long after his son was tucked into bed, Ethan stood by the window, watching the snow fall softly outside. He was still holding the judge's card. It wasn't a reminder of power, or of the law, or of the debt someone thought they owed him. It was a reminder of something simpler. That one decision, one moment of stopping when it would have been so much easier to keep. Gong had rewritten more than just his future. It had reminded him who he was. And sometimes, in the quiet moments when no one else is watching, that's the real judgment that matters most.